And they say there's no such thing as kayfabe anymore. Man, a lot of people sure did believe that WWE had really been sold to Saudi Arabia, even though they definitely haven't. And even now, I'm willing to bet there's still plenty of people out there who still think that WWE has been sold, even though, again, it hasn't been. And to be completely honest, even I was beginning to get worried about the situation. But how exactly does a rumor like this get that out of hand? How does the hysteria grow? And what can we learn from this whole situation? Well, that's the topic of this episode, because today... Thank you to all the wonderful supporters out there who support me over on Patreon, like True Sinister and The Reflection of Perfection. To find out how to get your own Patreon shout out, please go over and check out my Patreon page. As a former journalist, I like to pride myself on sticking to the facts, and if you have attended my live streams, you know how much I don't let rumor and innuendo get the better of me. At least, I try not to. Tuesday night, I, like many people, began to worry that WWE might have been sold, and so I, like many others, went into full-on panic mode, even though it turns out that worry was all for naught. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't attended a live stream, I highly hope that you do, but you gotta be subscribed to do so, so please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, and if you could give this video a like, that would be great too. But now, going back to the idea of journalism, well, that's the first reason why many of us took this rumor so seriously. Now, I've already talked about this in a previous video, but the world of professional wrestling journalism isn't the most reliable. Then again, in this day and age, the world of journalism in general isn't the most accurate, which is a crying shame. We live in a world filled with clickbait. It's all about the headlines, which are designed specifically to draw you in, and sometimes they do too good of a job, especially when some headlines prioritize getting clicks over being factual. Clicks equal money, and ultimately that's the main incentive, even if it shouldn't be. In an ideal world, informational news broadcasts would put journalistic integrity above all else, but that ain't the world we live in. Although, knowing this is not to say that we, the viewers, the listeners, aren't partially to blame as well, because we are. Being that we are all fully aware that news is a business, even if it shouldn't be, we're the ones that need to flex our critical eye. We owe it to ourselves, because in the end, we're the one clicking on those headlines. We're the ones who are checking out those articles. We're the ones giving those videos views. And the more we do so, the more encouragement we give the media to go ahead and keep on doing what they're doing. In the end, they're just trying to give us what we keep clicking on. So ultimately, you have to ask the question, is media corrupting us, or are we corrupting media? Although I do have to say that it wasn't everybody in wrestling journalism that was to blame, as members such as Sean Ross Sapp did a fantastic job uncovering this. We'll be getting back to him in a little bit. But at the same time, there were other wrestling news sources that I think could have dealt with a little more accountability. Because some wrestling news sites were really loud when they shouted that WWE had been sold, but got pretty quiet when it was revealed that that wasn't true. But of course, it isn't just wrestling news that's to blame, as all of us wrestling fans are also partially responsible too, because, well, that's how gossip spreads. We have to be honest, gossip is just part of human nature, which is not to say that it's right, but even though gossiping is an urge that we would all be better off suppressing, there are several reasons why it happens. Humans, after all, are very social creatures, and as such, the act of exchanging what is perceived as privileged information, even if it's right or wrong, even if it's positive or negative, is still seen as something of a bonding exercise. And some experts even believe it's part of how we learn what is socially acceptable and what isn't, with gossip being a part of cultural learning, as stories about people behaving badly or indecently will spread further and spread faster than stories about people doing good. And because of that, whether or not the information is true, the story about the action spreading still tells society that this action is bad, which in a sense is somewhat beneficial to society, even if it's not beneficial to the individual or individuals that the gossip is about, especially if it turns out not to be true. And so, as I just said, a little accountability goes a long way, and that's also true for wrestling fans as well. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of us reacted so strongly is because we were really worried about the potential outcome of this sale if it did happen. But speaking of fear, that leads us to our next entry. There was a lot of information out there saying things like WWE wouldn't be able to broadcast Raw or SmackDown on American television if they were owned by Saudi Arabia. Naturally, this caused a panic. Furthermore, there was a whole host of other scenarios that fans started concocting in their head about what could possibly happen if WWE had been sold. Many wrestling fans were obsessed with this story because they were afraid of the ultimate outcome. What would become of WWE? What would become of the tape library? What would become of this industry that they love as a whole? As the sale of WWE will undoubtedly have effects across the entire business. And so a lot of panic set in about the worst case scenarios on what could become of World Wrestling Entertainment if it was bought by Saudi Arabia. And even though there is no way to possibly know what could happen if that were to occur, the inner pessimists and many fans began to take over. And the reality is, we fear what we don't know. And as a survival mechanism, we try to mentally prepare ourselves for anything that we deem as a cause for concern. That's just human instinct. Even though when you stop to think about it, it's all over professional wrestling, which makes it somewhat absurd. But even though mass hysteria over something like professional wrestling might be a little silly in hindsight, the reality is part of the reason why this rumor works so well is because there were parts of it that were logical. But you know what? That brings us to our next entry. The big thing to remember about this rumor is that the reason it worked so well is because, quite frankly, it was rather believable. Like with any good rumor, the thing about this one is that it kinda made sense, at least parts of it did. After all, the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund has shown interest in a lot of sports, such as their involvement with Newcastle United, as well as their establishment of LIV Golf. And yes, WWE is sports entertainment, not sports, either way close enough. And while their work with Newcastle United and LIV Golf has caused some controversy, and that might be putting it mildly, not only does this show some cause for concern, but it does show that there was a very good chance that Saudi Arabia would have interest in WWE as well, especially considering that WWE has already been doing shows in Saudi Arabia as it is. Not only that, but as a publicly traded company, WWE has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders, which is troubling in and of itself. But that's the reality. But speaking of reality, let's go to what really happened in reality. And for that, well, that brings us to FightfulSelect.com's Sean Ross Sapp and Jimmy Van went to YouTube and made sure to clarify a lot of what went down when it came to this rumor and how it got so out of control. And if you haven't watched their live stream yet, please do, because it was a fantastic watch and very informative. Tell them Dave sent you. Not that it matters, because I'm pretty sure they have no idea who I am. And if you're watching this channel, you probably already know who they are anyway. But nevertheless, to give a brief overview to one of the major talking points they had, it was said that somebody theorized that with Stephanie McMahon resigning, that it had to be due to Saudi Arabia not wanting a female as CEO to their newly acquired company. And with that, people just took that information and ran with it, despite it being 100% not true. While yes, Stephanie did resign and she is no longer on the board of directors, and she did resign from the board before it was unanimously decided that Vince McMahon should be chair once again, that is all we know. Anything else is purely speculative. And good journalism always makes sure to separate the fact from the fiction. Alright, but now, with all that being said, what can we take away from this experience? Was it all negative, or is there a silver lining to it? Is there some positive? Overall, we should take this time to remind ourselves not to get swelled up in the hype. Especially as wrestling fans, we ought to know better, because being sucked into wrestling drama is pretty much how most of us became fans in the first place. But with that being said, we should know when we're being worked, at least hopefully. But at the same time, there's still a silver lining to all this, as we, as fans, can make it very loud and very clear that we know what we don't want to have happen to WWE, and we can tell WWE repeatedly, making sure that they get the message. We are all vulnerable to rumors, even myself, and this is a perfect example to teach us a lesson of just how vulnerable we are. But not only that, but this is also a great opportunity to make sure that WWE knows exactly how we feel. Well, there you go, a few reasons why this WWE sale rumor got so out of hand. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you liked it, and if you did, please give it a big thumbs up, and make sure that you're subscribed to this channel as a member of the Know-It-All Nation. Thanks again for watching, and thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters out there, and as always, Dave knows.